radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
I need your help to get to the year 1985.
You're listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
All right, good evening. Fade to Black. Bespoke radio for the masses. Yeah. Yeah. How you doing? Today's Tuesday, July 23rd, 2019. 203 days into the new year, just 162 days left. We are live from a bunker somewhere in the middle of beautiful downtown Burbank, California. And I would like to welcome everybody listening all around the world, all across the United States. Hither and thither, to and fro, back and forth, up and down, east and west, north and south, far and near. This is Fade to Black for KJCR, the Game Changer Network, and KGRA, the Planet. I am your host, Jimmy Church. What is cracking, everybody? How you doing? What an amazing week on the show. Tonight, very special guest, author, researcher, reporter, journalist, Annie Jacobsen. She's here. She's going to join us to talk about her new book, which is called Surprise, Kill, Vanish. That's right, the secret history of the CIA's paramilitary forces. Yeah, man. We're also going to talk about the Storm Area 51 Facebook event, which is now approaching 2 million people. It is far past 1.9 million. Annie Jacobsen, author, researcher, journalist, reporter. And we're going to be talking about her new book. It's called Surprise, Kill, Vanish, The Secret History of the CIA, Paramilitary Armies, Operators, and Assassins. We're also going to discuss the Storm Area 51 Facebook event. And I'm going to go outside of the box a little bit and talk about what she does with television. And you may not know about that. She is a 2016 Pulitzer Prize finalist and the New York Times bestselling author of Area 51, Operation Paperclip, The Pentagon's Brain, Phenomena, and, of course, the book we're going to be talking about tonight, Surprise, Kill, Vanish. She also writes and produces TV. She graduated from St. Paul's School and Princeton University, and I say this every time, where she served as captain of the Princeton women's varsity ice hockey team. Her website is AnnieJacobsen.com. I'd like to welcome back to Fade to Black, Annie Jacobsen. Annie, how are you?
Thank you for having me. It's so nice to be here again.
Yes, it is great to have you back. And, you know, Annie, let's just go right here first with the Area 51 stuff. And as this started to reach across the mainstream media, and I thought, that surprised me just a bit. But as I started to click on these articles, it was you that the mainstream media reached out to for not only information, but why this was a bad idea. How has your media week been, young lady? It's been pretty crazy, right?
Oh my God. I was driving along, and I mean, in an hour, I had the Wired UK calling me, and also a podcast in Japan, and Fox News and NPR. And it speaks to the global interest in Area 51. I mean, anything at all arises about that base, and people want to know what's going on.
My comment about this last week, and I just want your opinion on this, but up until the movie Independence Day, Area 51 was still very much a part of the conspiracy community, right? The rest of the world really didn't know much about it. Independence Day, with that famous scene, right, with Bill Pullman and I forget. Reb Horn, when he says, actually, sir, that's not completely accurate, right? So that scene, suddenly Area 51 is now part of pop culture because of that movie and its success. Now we've got Area 51 for real. That was probably the beginning of a general public awareness, right?
Yes. I mean, I wrote my book in 2011, and I think, it became very real for a lot of people with that, in as much that I interviewed 75 men and women, 74 men and one woman, who had lived and worked at the base. And these were former CIA engineers, spy pilots, military operators, you name it. These were all real people that went on the record with their name, and suddenly it was like, oh, wait a minute, this is actually a real physical place, and there's a lot of military and intelligence community partners out there working. 2 years later, President Obama said Area 51 for the first time publicly from any official, he being the top official, but he mentioned it at a Kennedy Center Awards ceremony, and that is when that is the first time in history that the actual name Area 51 became declassified, when the president spoke of it.
1.9 as of today, the latest count. I checked right before showtime. It's approaching 1.94 million people.
That's wild.
That's crazy, isn't it?
I mean, what's also interesting is that Bob Lazar, who is, of course, the sort of origin story of UFOs and Area 51, and I say origin story meaning he's the first person to have publicly spoken about it. He went on Joe Rogan's podcast recently, shortly after I did, and I think that brought a lot of this attention back in, but of course, specifically Lazar, because he had been so quiet for so many decades, and also there had, of course, been that film, and that is about him, and that's on Netflix. So you kind of have this whirlwind or a confluence of events dealing with Area 51 coming back into everybody's mind, and then this started. But it's wild to me that the Air Force made a comment about it, because they have never done that. They have always, while the Commander-in-Chief spoke of Area 51, the Air Force did not. And so, it speaks to the times, and I think it also speaks to the power of Facebook, because I continue to work with, as I continue to write more books, I work with people in the military and the intelligence community as sources, and I know what a serious eye they keep on Facebook, because the ability that a Facebook campaign has to incite people to do things is extremely troubling to the government. I mean, look no further than a place like India, where you actually have people dying because they're told to do things on Facebook. Right.
And think of the Arab Spring, and all of these different significant events around the world that were propped up and supported and created from social media. Social media is not a joke.
Yes.
Now we're talking about
the London riots.
Yes. It's something that has to be taken very seriously. And here we have 2 million people saying that they are going, another 2 million saying that they're interested, and another 3.5 million that are invited. I don't know what this number is going to be like come around September 20th, but if we look at fractions here, right? Because we're talking, we're talking about such a big number now. Now, if you're talking about 10% or 5%, we're still talking about a couple of 100,000 people showing up at Area 51. And now that is when the Pentagon has to take this serious. On the flip side, is Area 51 equipped for something like this? They may be equipped for the RV that shows up with a half a dozen people in it that want to, go and film. The camo dudes deal with that. But if a couple 100,000 people show up, what's going to happen?
Well, my theory is that it would never even come close to that. I mean, the fact that it's being forecasted on Facebook is probably, makes a lot of people that have to watch this kind of thing and monitor the potential for civil unrest, because that's what it would be called, certainly, or is potentially if people are talking about storming a military base. I mean, I just spent several days with NYPD, with the chief, seeing how policing works when you're dealing with large crowds. And the event was the 4th of July, right? So there was a huge display of fireworks on the Brooklyn Bridge, and I watched how the NYPD and the Joint Terrorism Task Force deal now with crowds, and in the day and age that we live, where you have could have an active shooter like the Vegas situation, or a post-event IED like the Ariana Grande concert. So that's local law enforcement, and those are people gathering for an event. They had also talked about how there was the gay gathering a couple days before that, and there had been 5 million people in the city. They had thought the number was going to be around 1 million. But again, this is local law enforcement working with their, federal partners like the FBI to, crowd control, to preemptively crowd control. But this is not this is not protesting in front of City Hall. This is as it's being pitched. It's called storming a military base, and that's a very different rubric for them to think about. But Again, they're not going to get anywhere near it because of the kind of surveillance there is, not just around Area 51, ground sensors to, overhead surveillance, but they will. Imagine not that many people live in Las Vegas. Imagine people driving on the 5 freeway or whatever it is to get there, right? That's how far out this is going to be watched.
Let's go to a worst case scenario, which is absolutely that 10,000 people, right? Worst case, are actually somehow getting past the security and are approaching the gate. And which is not, it's like wide open there. It's not, it's not, you don't have guard towers, and it's not like a prison. This is out in the open desert. But if that actually happened, the government wouldn't start shooting at its own citizens on American soil, would they? It wouldn't come to that.
There's so many places, they're called con plans, like contingency plans, that are scenarios that are run through like this. And again, you have to back way out from that, because no one's going to be allowed to mass along, any of those roads, the extraterrestrial highway or anywhere else. They're just not. They're just not going to get to that point. Local law enforcement would step in long before that. So, and they'll, of course, have some kind of situation in place that it is all done very legally, but no one will be allowed in there. And I've been, the main access to get to Area 51, the way, from what I understand, that's not really obstructed by, terrain that is impassable, is through the Nevada test site. That's the closest I've come to it as a guest of some nuclear engineers, and looked at the base from, the hill, that's where the base is, where you're sort of standing in what's called Area 10, near where the Sedan crater is in the Nevada test site. And you can kind of see there. But you're talking about a large distance that no one is going to be able to get near. And, is anyone going to fire on a crowd? Again, it's been a long time since Kent State.
Right.
Given the nature, I mean, policing, law enforcement is extraordinarily mindful of and sensitive to, I think, how they're perceived. And that has to do with many of the sort of, protests and things that have happened in the past few years. At least this is my experience, again, because I'm just working on some stuff about law enforcement. And they are not walking around like ostriches with their head in the sand. They're just as concerned with people's perception of them as they are with their behavior. Of course, you have these aberrant, horrible things with rogue cops, behaving, like criminals. But for the most part, I imagine that there's a big effort behind the scenes going on to this. As the number gets bigger, by the way,
it's crazy. I was doing some math last week. It was like Thursday, and I was checking. It was about 15 people per second. All right,
wow.
I did a 10-minute average, and it was about 15 people per second.
It's like people liking the president's tweets,
Well, see, now the big question, I mean, the real question is how many people are clicking on going for grins, right? They're not serious.
Right.
And then how many are clicking on that and are absolutely making travel plans, right? That's the question.
Yes, but of course, our federal government is able to monitor all of that, like it or not. You can just, I'm sure of it. I'm not even guessing there, because the stakes are too high to have a situation like you just said, like, oh my God, what if 10,000 people start running? The stakes are too high to start shooting at American citizens. The stakes are too high to start tear gassing American citizens. Facebook is a dangerous platform or Facebook can be an extraordinary dangerous platform that incites people to riot and, create civil unrest scenarios that get way beyond anyone's control. And that absolutely is not something that anyone wants to have happen out near a classified military base.
I spoke to Wolf McCarran last week, and Wolf is one of the original Area 51 guys back in the early 90s, out there taping, with all of the names, right, all the people. And he had said that the easiest thing to do, it's not about security at the base, and it's not even Rachel, Nevada. It's like way down, like by Alamo, right, which is the next closest town, real town, is just close off the freeway. Close it off. And that's it. It would be a very simple thing to do. Just absolutely close down the freeway, and nobody's getting near the base.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's many, many, many ways to do that. I mean, look, think about every now and then a pilot from Nellis Air Force Base at Nellis Air Force Range, sort of inadvertently, in quotes, flies over restricted airspace of Area 51. They get escorted out instantly. And those fighter jets that escort them out just appear, right? I mean, the contingencies are there always 24/7.
The reports that have been coming out lately, and your book, Area 51, which I have, and it's excellent, you suggested a couple of things when it came to what the UFO part of this may be. On the flip side, lately, we've got Air Force, naval pilots talking about unidentified objects. We've got all this, the gimbal footage and these 3 videos that have popped up. Now, President Trump mentioned with Tucker Carlson the subject of UFOs. The Senate was just briefed by the Navy on UAPs. And then this Area 51 thing pops up. Does this feel a little suspicious to you? That all of this UFO talk in Fox and CNN and the BBC and the New York Times and our president, the Senate, Navy pilots, all of this happening at the same time? It seems almost agenda-ish.
Well, I mean, I don't see it that way, only because I just see it as events culminating, right? If you reverse engineer it from this event, then you just go, well, of course people are going to be interested in clicking, there's going to be 15 clicks every second to join, because all you have to do is go back to the winter when the Tic Tac footage was released. And then you have, the Pentagon admitting for the first time, oh, actually, we do have a UFO program, an unidentified flying object program. Aircraft we can't identify, our 5 airmen have seen, right? So, da-dun, da-dun, da-dun. Then you have all the different things you mentioned. So, and this builds because people are interested, and this is both hard science to some people, in terms of experimental aircraft, certainly to me, and it's also narrative. I want to say mythology. I don't say conspiracy, because I think it's more, when I say myth, I mean like archetype, right? Because I'm not someone who is a UFO believer, but I certainly don't dismiss it or disparage it. I think it's super interesting, but I look at it as a narrative, right? My information takes me down the path of the history of Area 51 that's had a UFO department since the 1950s, when people were mistaking the U-2 for a UFO.
Right.
But one can always stand corrected, right? And because you have these two competing narratives, and they really are competing narratives, because many people disparage the other side, right? It becomes super interesting to a lot of people, and it's also a heck of a lot more interesting to talk about than politics, because I do think people have more of, okay, this is my position, but, right? Mm-hmm. They really do. I mean, sure, you get some curmudgeons. I run into them all the time that are, fanatical in their position, and are absolutely right. But for the most part, I think people have a really strong position that they believe, and then they remain really curious and want to know more. And so therefore it's like, what a great topic.
I wanted to ask you this, very specifically, because with your research into Skunk Works and DARPA, Paperclip, and of course Area 51, that what these Navy pilots have been seeing, and we have to depend on their professionalism, right? We have to depend on their eyes. With these craft that they were seeing and the way that they described the way that they flew and lack of propulsion, could they have been witnessing some skunk work test projects, some NASA test projects, some DARPA Sandia crazy propulsion system, and that it was just ours and had nothing to do with the UFO phenomenon?
I mean, my position would be that's the more likely scenario, right? But again, I don't discount anything. But okay, I'll give you an example. I was just up at Skunk Works last month because I appear as a talking head in a documentary about Skunk Works called Secrets in the Sky, and it's all the different programs the spy plane programs that have gone on there. And as part of that, the movie premiere was up there at Skunk Works, and they take your phones away, and as part of it, they were like, "Oh, we're going to take you guys into the Skunk Works," where I had never been, and most people are not allowed. And there are these big giant barriers that you can't see behind certain things that are going on, but a little bit of it was for show, but what they did show us was what they said was an unclassified new plane they're working on. And I'm not totally precise here. We're having a conversation, so just bear with me. The information is generally correct, but don't quote me, right? So it's they're working on a new plane that's a $250 million contract with NASA to learn how to fly a plane kind of like the Concorde was, right? That's faster than the speed of sound, but that's for commercial use. And what they said is the reason they're working on this is because the reason they're working on the unclassified program is because they have to. There's some kind of a law in effect, and again, I don't have all the facts straight about. You can't break this. You can't have that sonic boom over cities anymore. Okay?
Right.
Congress passed something against it, so they have to get around it, and they're doing all this high technology work. This is what they said, right? To somehow change the noise on breaking the sound barrier, or do something, right? You get the idea.
Right.
Again, this was just coming at me with no notebook. I'm like, information, okay? But the point to me that was interesting was that's the $250 million unclassified version.
Right.
I wonder what the classified version is, right?
Right.
And I know from writing all this history about Area 51, that's just a classic cover. It's like, oh, that's why we're doing all this stuff. Oh, that's why we're working with the sound barrier, right? Because you need a cover story for everything. Because people start to wonder.
Yes, and you know that the SR-72 is in the works. And what you probably saw was the unclassified version of it. Man, I'm so jealous.
Or its cousin, exactly, right?
Right.
Because speed is the new stealth. Because, electronic warfare, all of which, or not all of which, but so much of which is tested out at Area 51. But electronic warfare is advancing at such a rate, we can't keep up with the measures and countermeasures of China and Russia and so on and so forth. And so as fast as we can create stealthy new situations, the enemy is creating ways to detect it through a new electronic radar system. And so that has made speed the new stealth, because if something's flying fast enough, you can't take it down.
Do you subscribe? Do you subscribe to the Ben Rich quotes over the years about Skunk Works that they're 50 years ahead of anything that we know about currently? Do you get that vibe from Skunk Works if you were just there?
I don't know if did Rich say 50?
Yeah, I do believe.
Years?
Yes.
Because my book on DARPA, The Pentagon's Brain, makes very clear that they are working on technology 25 years out, because that's what their requirement is by Congress.
Sure.
So I don't know if it's 50. I am certain it's 25. But the 25 is always pushing forward, and so somewhere between 25 and 50. But that's absolutely the name of the game.
Right.
Another interesting Skunk Works moment for me was when the F-117 was retired. I think this was around, I want to say 2010, right?
Mm-hmm.
I went to the banquet up at Skunk Works because several of the engineers in my Area 51 book worked on that F-117. Back to your question about future technology. They were working on it back in 1977 when it was called the Hopeless Diamond, long before the Have Blue. And so they had been part of this program for decades, and then they watched it fly in the Gulf War, and then they watched it, be put in the shed. And what I thought was fascinating was whoever it was that was speaking, the president of Skunk Works or the president of Lockheed at the time, said something to the effect of, "My God, we ran this program for decades to stay ahead by decades. 10,000 people had top secret clearances to work on it, and there was not a single leak." And that I thought was really, really, really interesting when people talk about what can you keep secret.
What can you keep
People always
secret?
say, go ahead. Yeah.
No, what can you keep secret? Well, how about that, right?
Yes. Right? Because so you can keep anything secret. So again, that narrative of people who believe that the technology has captured UFOs, and a lot of times the naysayers say, well, that's impossible. You couldn't keep that secret. It's like, well, yes, you can. You can keep really big projects secret. Look at the Manhattan Project.
Let's take our break right here. Our guest tonight, Annie Jacobsen. When we come back after this short break, Surprise, Kill, Vanish. The secret history of the CIA paramilitary armies, operators, and assassins. Her website is AnnieJacobsen.com. The links are over at Jimmy Church Radio. I'll be right back after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back, Fade to Black. Follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. You can follow Annie. We've got our links up right there at Annie Jacobsen on Twitter. Tomorrow night, Dr. Kenneth James is going to be here. We're going to be talking Carl Jung. Do not miss tomorrow night. Tonight, it's Annie Jacobsen. We're going to be jumping into her book, Surprise, Kill, Vanish in the Storm Area 51. What a great title for the book, Surprise, Kill, Vanish, Storm Area 51. That will be the next book. But, oh, man, you got to love live radio.
That's funny.
Yes, yeah. It is. It's really funny. You mentioned earlier.
That's what would happen to 1.9 million people.
Surprise, kill, and vanish. Well, I could see the press conference with President Trump after that. The comment that you made earlier about UFOs, that you're interested in it, but you're not quite on the believer side. Before we move forward, let me suggest this. One evening in the future, you need to come out with us. We have the latest in night vision goggles, and we'll go out and look at the night sky. And I want your opinion on what is going on up there, because it is crazy town. You know, you go out there with, and it's not, Annie, you need to imagine this for a second. You look up with night vision. And no, you look up before the night vision and you're looking at the Milky Way, right? It's a beautiful starry sky that you're used to seeing. And then, nothing's moving. And then you look through night vision and you're looking at stuff zigzagging, turning, appearing, lighting up, chasing each other. And then you pull the night vision down and look at it, there's nothing there. And you have this epiphany, right? And you go back to the night vision and you just go, holy cow, what is that? And it's not satellites, moving east to west or west to east and, in a straight line. It's stuff up there. I don't know if it's ours or ET or whatever. I don't know. But it's something that's very hard to wrap your mind around. And I would love your opinion. You need to go and check it out one night.
I'll take you up on that.
Yeah. That'll be your next book for sure. That'll get you a Pulitzer. That right there. And you see, the thing is, when we have done that, I will always inevitably have somebody there that says, why isn't the mainstream media reporting on this? It's one thing to talk about flashing lights or somebody has been abducted by a UFO. They'll ignore that stuff, and we understand that. But this is something that the mainstream media should be asking questions about. There must be a journalist out there that would want these questions answered, but it doesn't happen. And it goes on every single night. It's going on right now as you and I talk.
Where did you get the night vision goggles?
We have our own company. I have Generation. Right. I have Generation 4, and they're incredible. Same stuff that the military uses. Yeah. Yep. They're about $4,000, $5,000 a pair. It's the real deal, and they're really fun to use. They're really fun, and they're fun to use on your neighbors. More on that later. Let's talk about the new book. And the title of the book, which is Surprise, Kill, Vanish, The Secret History of CIA Paramilitary Armies, Operators, and Assassins, sounds like an impossible project. It just sounds impossible. Where did the idea come from, and how did you approach this kind of research?
It was a wild book to write. I mean, the people in this book were pretty remarkable, and a lot of night vision glasses. I mean, they have them, not me. But I got the idea because I was, I had an old colleague. I used to report on Homeland Security, and I was writing my Area 51 book, and this fellow, his first name was Brett, he had gone off, retired from Department of Homeland Security and gone off to the Middle East, and he couldn't tell me what he did, and I didn't ask, but he was on his way back, and he came by the house and brought me a challenge coin, and it said, U.S. State Department, Kabul, Afghanistan. And I thought that was interesting because nothing about him was diplomatic. He was weapons trained and military trained. And at the time, my boys were young, and we had a lot of G.I. Joes in the garden, and from the American Revolution to the present, and they all had weapons, but they had the wrong weapons on the different G.I. Joes. And he said, "You got these all wrong," and showed them and kind of gave them a lesson of firearms throughout history. And they were fascinated. And he said, "If it's okay with your mom and dad, I'll show you a couple real guns and how they are handled." And I knew him to be a licensed weapons safety instructor, so I said, "That's fine." He sets up a sniper rifle in the dining room. And through the scope, I live up in the Hollywood Hills, and through the scope I can see sort of a leaf on the canyon, across the canyon. And I realized this is what my colleague is doing in Afghanistan. So the boys go back out to the garden. He showed them another, a pistol and things. And then there was one case he never opened. And when the boys were gone, I said, "What's in that case?" And he opened it up, and there was a knife there. And it wasn't just any old knife. It was like a serrated knife. And I said, "What's that for?" Immediately realizing my naivete and my mistake. And he said, "Sometimes a job requires quiet." And that's all he said. Never told me another thing about his job. I never asked. I learned later from another colleague that he worked for the CIA's paramilitary, a division, a very secret division called Ground Branch. And that was the beginning of my wanting to write a book about the CIA's paramilitary. And it took me 10 years and a whole bunch of other books to sort of slowly build sources to position myself in a place where I could then commit to writing a book and work with some sources. 45 sources went on the record with me. These are retired people who retired from these operations going back to the Korean War. But the 16 guys that were operating today, or rather, 5 years ago, went on the record, did not, went using their call signs. So it was an extraordinary book to write, and it's unbelievable that the CIA has a paramilitary. And when I say that, it means that there is the Defense Department is the military. It runs under what's called Title 10 authority, and they have rules of engagement, and they conduct wars. The CIA's paramilitary does not follow those same rules at all. They work under an authority called Title 50, and they can do all kinds of things, and they have small units and singletons, and they have a program, and always have, which is the tip of the paramilitary spear, and that is assassination, or as it's often called, preemptive neutralization.
The obvious question is, the 16 gentlemen that are currently active, were the words CIA part of the conversation?
So no one who works for the CIA ever says CIA. I can't think of a single person ever saying that. They say the agency, or they say the outfit.
Right.
Or they don't say anything. They just talk about what they do. But everyone who is in my book knew at least two other individuals and operated. They operate. So that's what they do, and they operated with one another. And they weren't current. When you're current, you cannot speak to a reporter. Anyone who works for the CIA, the agency, the outfit, they're polygraphed. So I always know if I'm talking to someone that's current, because they're like, "Annie, I can't talk to you. I'm not going to fail my poly," right? A number one question is, have you spoken to a member of the press? So, and you can't lie. I mean, you can, but you're going to be caught with your polygraph. And so these guys had all retired. They all operated in Afghanistan and Iraq, and had stopped running missions like right around 2014 or 2015.
Now, I said the words CIA. Obviously, I meant the letter CIA. The reason why I asked such a direct question is that that's a zone that it seems almost impossible to get near to. I don't know anybody that I know of, and even if I did, I don't know how I would approach them to discuss this. But it seems that they were maybe. Are they ready? Are they? Are they at a point in their life where they're okay to discuss this?
Well, okay, so, consider this. I worked with people who are such legends, and when I say worked with, I mean I interviewed them, that are such legends in the CIA that it's known they're in the CIA. Like, my main character is a guy called Billy Waugh, and he's now 89, but he's been running operations for the agency since the 60s. And so when it became known that I was working with him and he was telling me things, and again, a lot of missions get declassified, or rather, the CIA works in this way. Let me back up for a minute, okay? Well, let me finish that thought. I interviewed, for example, the CIA's longest-serving lawyer, okay, a guy named John Rizzo, who wrote many of the memos that make these operations legal. So I am the kind of reporter that works and works and works and works and works to get to the point where I am actually going to have real, legitimate individuals go on the record with me and confirm things that I have spent quite a bit of time establishing can be confirmed.
Right.
That the public might not even know or even want to bother, knowing what the heck that is, right? So I interviewed Rizzo, and I also interviewed a number of senior intelligence service staff. So that's the equivalent of a general at the Pentagon. These are called CIA has. They're not generals or colonels. They're CIS 1, CIS 2, CIS 3, CIS 4. That's the way you go up, right? And I interviewed 5 or 6 of them on the record with their name, because it made more sense, I imagine, to have the information correct than erroneous. And of course they would say, I can't talk about that, Annie, and that's fine too, but I could confirm piecemeal a lot of things. But let me give you a quick precursor here, okay? So the president has always had 2 options. First option, diplomacy. And 2 options, I say, when dealing with foreign adversaries or foreign conflicts. First option is diplomacy, always the first choice. Second option, war. Doesn't work out, we're going to war. After World War II, with the creation of the National Security Act of 1947, the president got a secret third option, tertia optio, it's called in Latin. And that is the CIA's paramilitary. It's called covert action. It's the hidden hand. And some of it is done through humans, some of it is done through information, some of it is done through actual, what is called direct action, paramilitary action. And that is what I wrote about. And, it's supposed to be the hidden hand. It's supposed to never be known. But guess what? If there's a huge debacle like the Bay of Pigs, it is known. And the Bay of Pigs is a great example because that was a CIA paramilitary operation. And so it's known because all these records have been declassified. But it wasn't pieced together in the way I believe I did in my book, Surprise, Kill, Vanish, to demonstrate, oh, wait a minute, Guatemala, when we knocked out the president and sent all these guys, that was, oh my God, that was the CIA's paramilitary? You see, so I take, wait a minute, when we killed Che Guevara, wait, that was the CIA's paramilitary operator's assassin? Yes, aha. And I piece it all together. Wait a minute. Obama's targeted killing program with the drones, that was the CIA's paramilitary army? Yes. Right? So that, in that manner, I write history.
The staff, the men, the boots on the ground side of this, are they, help me understand here, are they military like during war, right? When they're active, they're with the military. During peacetime, does the CIA recruit them, to go out and to do missions? Or does the CIA have own, you know what I mean, full-time paramilitary group? How does that work?
It's a great question, and it has evolved over time, right? So when it started out in 1947, it was called the President's Guerrilla Warfare Corps. So all the guys are trained in guerrilla warfare. This is not like military tactics like infantrymen, storm the front lines.
Right.
This is guerrilla warfare. This is surprise, kill, vanish. This is ugly, dirty, down and dirty, kill as brutally as you can. Use a piano wire if you need to. Okay, that's what guerrilla warfare is. And over the decades, it has become the way in which we fight wars is much more guerrilla warfare based than not. All wars on terror are guerrilla warfare based, right? So to answer your question, everybody in the CIA's paramilitary has guerrilla warfare training, most of it from the military. So most CIA paramilitary operators were Green Berets, Delta Force, Navy SEALs, paratroopers, MARSOC. They retire from their military service. They get what is called sheep-dipped in some situations, and then they go over and they work for the CIA. In a few instances, officers in particular, who become PMUs, paramilitary operations officers, they have like little bit of a different track. They go to the farm and get paramilitary, guerrilla warfare training at the farm. That's the CIA's training headquarters. And then they become the sort of, the equivalent, the military equivalent of the officer of the group. And those are the guys who are like, saying no, essentially, out in the field. But they all have to be, trained because they're all in these extraordinary life or death situations.
How do we wrap our minds around this? In that we see it in the movies, right? The CIA paramilitary, the covert, the slashing of a throat and the, stillness of the night, that kind of thing. And it makes for good Hollywood movies. But then there's the other side of it, which is harsh reality. It's like Neo in the Matrix when he jumps back and says, "What? You mean this is real?" So how do we wrap our minds around that and accept it?
I mean, that's, writing this book was extraordinary for me, and you've hit the nail on the head with the question. So, going back to how did I, when my colleague came and visited with me, and I realized, oh my God, he's doing Surprise, Kill, Vanish, right? Which was that name comes from the original program that fought Nazis by the OSS, which was the precursor organization to the CIA. And when he went that night, when I was thinking of him with the knife versus the sniper rifle, I was like, okay, I can, to your point about, Neo and the Matrix and how do we wrap our minds around this, I thought, this is so strange. I can accept my friend shooting an Al-Qaeda or a Taliban on the next hill over with a sniper rifle. I can accept that for whatever reason. But I couldn't imagine him slitting someone's throat or jabbing it in their ribs. And that gave me pause. Not as much him doing it, but me. I was like, why am I killing is killing. Why does one seem one way and the other seems the other way? And I wrote the book because I wanted to know the answer of exactly that question you're asking. And I know that I learned an answer. I learned a lot writing this book, and I take the reader through this extraordinarily complex and at times very, very dark history. And I think, people who I have gotten an extraordinary amount of response back from people who have had that same, who have shared with me their experience after reading the book, which is super interesting because that's why I wrote the book, because you have an individual response of what you think about this.
Has there, we're going to head towards a break here in a second. Has there been any blowback, not only from, say, the CIA? I don't know if the CIA sanctioned or blessed the writing of this book, but then the other part with those that went on the record, were they reticent after the fact and maybe got a little heat?
I haven't heard any of that. I mean, the most heat I got from it's always bizarre being a reporter, because what you think and what you worry about and what you wonder about, and you just can never predict. And what I was most interested in is that, one, I am the kind of author that gets reviewed in big mainstream newspapers, and one that will remain nameless newspaper ripped me personally to shreds, saying that I was endorsing this kind of toxic masculinity and this, Hollywood fantasy. And it was just so bizarre, because I thought, I'm aware that people bring their own 2 cents into any book they read, but that was not at all my takeaway from it. And this was actually, ironically, it was a Pulitzer Prize winning author ripping me to shreds, saying that I was just
glorifying killing.
Yes, and I thought, wow, that's wild, But again, I'll end with this. I know we're going to break. I write books. I try to be neutral. That's my real. I definitely don't have a political opinion, or I don't bring it into the books. And I try to be neutral and just tell the facts. And I remember when I wrote Operation Paperclip about the Nazi scientists we brought here, I could go on Fox News and have them say, "Oh my God, Annie, thank God you wrote this book. You showed that these guys were morally reprehensible. They were terrible, but thank God we brought them here, because we wouldn't have won the Cold War without them. Thank you for writing this book." Then I could go over on CNN or even to the Holocaust Museum, and they would say, "Oh my God, Annie, thank God you wrote this book. You show us that these Nazi scientists were the most despicable, evil, horrible men in the whole world. And boy, is it so clear we should have never, ever done this program." They read the same book.
Isn't that interesting, though? Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, yes. And what I was fascinated by in this particular book is that no one wrote the counter review and said, there wasn't the CNN version of it. And I thought that was fascinating, and I do think that's a product of the times that we live in. I think that's interesting, and I think more than anything what it does is it speaks to the burden that these operators have, because, again, not trying to pass a moral judgment on what they do, but they are doing something legally. They are doing something that comes directly from a presidential memorandum of understanding. It's called an MOU. I know that from interviewing the CIA's lawyer. This is all legal. There is no such thing as a rogue operation. These guys are doing what they are asked to do for the country. And to think that that's equated with moral reprehensibility, or whatever the word is that is interesting to me. And you asked, is it dark? A lot of these guys feel stigmatized, and I empathize with that, because, I sit here in my air-conditioned office, and they're over there,
right,
working at the behest of the president.
Right, doing things that, well, we see it in movies, but then do we keep our heads in the sand and ignore that this is also possibly part of our own reality? And that's the crazy part for me. Let's take our break right here. Our guest tonight, Annie Jacobsen. We're talking about her new book. It's called Surprise, Kill, Vanish: The Secret History of the CIA Paramilitary Armies, Operators, and Assassins. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. We'll be right back after this short break. Stay with us. back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, our guest is Annie Jacobsen. We're discussing her new book. It is called Surprise, Kill, Vanish. You can get it on Amazon. Annie's links to her website are over at jimmychurchradio.com. It is an excellent read. And Annie, I was sitting here thinking, I wanted to talk about, the state of mind of the people that you interviewed. And it takes me back to the mid-'80s. I had a friend, wealthy guy in Pasadena, and he came to me, very cool, and he goes, "Hey, Jimmy, I'm going to be going on this African adventure. We're going to go up the Nile. We're going to go through Somalia and Ethiopia and the Sudan, and we're going to end up in Egypt by boat. And if you want to go, you can go." And I said, what did you just say? I'm just a kid. Right? And he goes, I'm going to be meeting with one of the guys tonight. We got to go through training and guns and stuff. And he's a mercenary. And so come to dinner with us tonight. We'll talk about it. So I go to this dinner. And I'm with this guy who is one of the most intimidating, young too, beard, big guy. And he is talking about the training that we got to do to go through this and automatic fire. And we're going to go here and, weapons training and all of this. But we're going to go through all of this, rough part of Africa. But I was studying this guy, Annie, and there was something. He was nice and everything, but there was something bent. There was something that just freaked me out. I remember riding home in the car going, "Dude, I'm out. No way. No way."
Wow.
But my friend did go and went, did the whole thing. And I saw him like 3 months later, and his stories were pretty amazing. But these personnel, when you look at them and you talk to them, how are they? Are they stable? Are they okay? They're doing the craziest task that can be imagined, aren't they?
Yes, but let me differentiate. First of all, that's an amazing story, and I wonder, my God, it doesn't get any more dangerous than going, along the Nile in those countries.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder what they were doing. A mercenary is a broad term, right? So what I write about specifically in the book, and what I try to make really clear, is that all of this is legal and at the behest of the President of the United States, right? So, and they're doing direct action. Direct action, in essence, means, in many cases, killing. certainly in the war on terror now, when you're going after a high value target, it's called a kill or capture mission. But what everyone would say to me is, it's a kill mission. None of these guys are going to let themselves get captured. So, they are going on kill missions, very small, targeted hunter missions, in essence. So it does give that sense of the kind of training you must have and the mindset you must have. But it is military in nature, in as much that is how they're training and that's how they're operating. All of the CIA paramilitary operators I spoke to, and the bigger branch is called the Special Activities Division, okay, SAD. And they have what's called a ground branch, which is boots on the ground. They have an air branch, drones. They have a maritime branch, which is operations at sea. That's impenetrable. I could not get any information about that, okay? So how's that for intrigue?
Right.
But they all the ground branch operators talk about really specifically and very clearly that they are not Blackwater. They are not defense contractors. They are very specifically doing the president's bidding. And so there is a friction between this idea of, Blackwater, kind of what they think perceived to be sort of gung-ho, outspoken, very kind of, for lack of a better word, braggers, let's say, right, who don't actually have the authority to do direct action, because direct action is only legal at the president's behest under Title 50. And so these guys pride themselves on being highly trained and following the action specifically as to what they're supposed to do. And therefore they don't brag. They are very, very, very soft-spoken about all of this.
The other aspect of this, do they, I know these may seem like dumb questions, but do they wear uniforms? Do they have ID? Are they traveling with passports?
Oh my God, that's actually a brilliant question. They do not wear any uniforms whatsoever, because it is the third option, tertio optio, is the president's hidden hand. It is meant to be plausibly denied. So they do, great question. They do not wear any markings on their clothes. And during the Vietnam War, the organization was called MAC-V-SOG, and those missions have been declassified, and you can see that was a Defense Department and CIA joint operation, but they weren't wearing any markings. So even their cigarettes were Chinese, right? So there's nothing American. Their weapons are Swedish K. Their knives are made in Japan. They do not have anything American. I mean, here's another interesting detail. The Bin Laden raid, okay, when Bin Laden was killed, that was a CIA paramilitary operation. So you go, it's promoted as the Navy SEALs, because all of those guys were in fact Navy SEALs by training. But for the night, they became CIA operators. They did not wear military markings on any of their clothing. And it's funny because the one of the guys' outfits was at the museum here, the Nixon Library, and it was so funny because you could see I was with a CIA operator, and he was showing me, like, okay, you see that's been his name, O'Neill, got sewn on for effect to be in the museum, but everything else about it was missing any kind of marking. So that was a CIA mission, and then the next day, once Bin Laden was killed, the guys went back to being SEALs. Why? Because you can't kill the military. Title 10 rules of engagement. The U.S. military cannot go kill someone in a sovereign nation, which is Pakistan. So it has to, whereas the CIA can under Title 50 authority. And so that's why in that famous photograph you have the director of the CIA, Leon Panetta, standing there next to Obama, because it was his mission.
How many? I don't know if you've got this information, but how many of these operations go on? Is it like right now? You and I are on the radio.
Yep.
Is there something going on like right now?
Okay. So the Special Activities Division, it had all kinds of names throughout. I mean, I go back in history, right? I mean, because there's paramilitary armies doing things like for JFK that did the Bay of Pigs, and then JFK had his assassination unit, which he called executive action. Reagan called his preemptive neutralization. So they have the big units, the small units, and then sort of during the Reagan era, it became known as the Special Activities Division, and it has been that through the decades since. But during the War on Terror, this authority expanded exponentially, and recently the Special Activities Division has become the Special Activities Center at Langley, CIA headquarters, meaning it's its own interdisciplinary center. It has more missions going on than ever in the history of the CIA, and, as I've been told, operating in 134 countries around the globe.
Okay. This is where we just got to get a little bit direct. There is the obvious stuff like Maduro in Venezuela, these things that are in the public domain. But if these operations are going down, we would never hear about them, right?
Absolutely. You're not supposed to. That's the whole option. That's the whole point of the hidden hand. So in other words, and also what I might add, a lot of times when they're on in sovereign nations, right, and NATO partner countries, what I learned is that a lot of times a team will be sent in to do what's called make book on somebody. So there is an individual that is going to be on the president's killer capture list, but the team goes in to make book on the person to find out who he is, where he lives, who his family members are, what he does all day, and then they begin to build a package about him, first and foremost, that they might want to blackmail him with. So they find out, does he have any porn habits? Is he having any affairs? Is he stealing money? And then they use all of this information in a manner that they might take non-lethal action. So they may destroy the individual socially, meaning within the hierarchy that the terrorist organization that he exists in, Hezbollah or Hamas, by saying, look, we know this about you, and if you don't act, maybe they turn him. Otherwise, we're going to make this public. So those are non-lethal operations. And then in other situations, there's capture operations where they grab somebody, and that's a whole other problem because Obama got rid of enhanced interrogation, and so it's really tricky. What do you do with someone? You can't hold them indefinitely, right? I deal with that in the book. Obama, got rid of the enhanced interrogation programs, but expanded the kill missions. So some people, accuse him of getting rid of torture by killing. These are really complicated issues.
The revealing of this publicly would never happen, right? It just wouldn't appear in mainstream media. But on the other side of it, if you are the subject of one of these missions, you're embarrassed by it. If somebody is killed, if somebody's taken out, if somebody is captured or kidnapped or removed out of the country, you're not going to publicize it on your end either. You can't have that embarrassment. Therefore, all of these missions pretty much go unnoticed. That has to be the way it goes.
That's exactly right. And so the ones I take you through a lot of things that Billy Waugh did because he, being 89, he shared with me a number of the missions, and I was able, and some of them have gone wrong, and so I was able to source the facts of the missions and flesh them out and demonstrate to readers, this is how it worked in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, right? You can see all of that, and then you begin to realize as you move through the War on Terror and to where we are today, you perhaps are looking at different events that go on in the world with a little bit of a different eye. Again, you have to draw your own conclusions because only time will tell us what how that outcome unfolded.
The other part of this, where you had stated a few times now that because of this Directive 50, that it is completely legal. And if the president has a capture or kill list, I'm sure the list is long, one, but two, there isn't anything for them to worry about. I'm talking about the paramilitary forces. They know that they are allowed to do the ultimate to make this mission successful. And that's it. So they don't have that weighing on their conscience, do they?
Absolutely. But it gets a little tricky sometimes. So let me tell you about Billy Waugh. So, for example, he's what's called a singleton, okay? So he works mostly alone. Now, he was a MAC v. SOG paramilitary and actually military operator during the Vietnam War and did hundreds of cross-border missions. He was in charge of the mission to kill the general of the North Vietnamese Army, General Giap, right? So his training was extraordinary. And then you go all the way. He's now moved decades through to the 1990s, and he's given a mission to go to Sudan to find this almost a terrorist who's just cropped up on the radar. And what's his name? Osama bin Laden. It's 1992. And Billy Waugh is in Sudan acting as a singleton, so his cover is that he's an old man on a fitness craze. So he's running around Sudan in jogging shorts. And that didn't work. He has the Sudanese after him. And another thing that the CIA did is so they gave him a mask that made him look like a black Dinka tribesman. He's wearing literally a rubber mask with gloves and everything, driving around trying to conduct surveillance on this unknown terrorist named Osama bin Laden. He finally takes pictures of him, the first ever that the CIA had of bin Laden in 1992. And now a decision goes, well, what are we going to do with him? So a memo gets sent up to President Clinton, who was the only president, from my understanding of interviewing all these people, who actually did not authorize targeted killings. So there's two versions of the story. Billy Waugh's version is that it went all the way to the president, who said, don't ever ask me this again. And Kofor Black, who was the station chief of Khartoum at the time, who I also interviewed, said that's not how it went down. I didn't even let that option go to the president. It simply went to the director of the CIA, who said no. But what Billy Waugh says he wanted to do was kill bin Laden and then throw the man's body over the wall of the Iranian embassy, set off a bunch of grenades, get the press there, and blame it on the Iranians.
Oh,
so you can see the kind of world that we are talking about.
I did want to ask you, I think we went around this earlier, when you are, speaking to these guys, and you know that they have killed, like for real, paid to kill. What is that like? Are you nervous? Do they start to open up to you? What's that atmosphere like? That has to be, well, strange is the right word. I mean, do you have to watch what you say, or are you just wide open?
Well, I really consider myself like the kind of reporter that likes to get the human story. So information is really interesting, but I want to know what makes people tick.
Right.
And so spending the most time I can with someone is about that. And I just reserve all judgment on killing. I mean, someone on Reddit said, Billy Waugh, he killed more people than cancer, right? But Billy Waugh and I, for me to get a sense of him, I suggested that we go back to Vietnam, which we did in 2017. Together we flew to Vietnam to meet with the son of General Giap. I mean, General Giap was higher on the kill list, LBJ's kill list, than Ho Chi Minh himself, okay? Mm-hmm. That's how much the government wanted General Giap dead, because the whole North Vietnamese army was led by him, and he was this charismatic leader. Waugh was in charge of the mission to kill him. And I write about what was called Oscar 8. That was a code name for the operation. They had to cross the border, go behind enemy lines in Laos. I mean, all these aircraft went down. It turned very quickly from a kill mission to a rescue mission. It was horrendous. All kinds of people died. I mean, it's just one of those shocking stories. Reporting that was like, oh my God. But here are Billy Waugh and I, 50 years later, going back to Hanoi to meet with Giap's son at Giap's house next to Ho Chi Minh's mausoleum in Hanoi, and meet, not only was Giap had died at the ripe old age of 103, just a few years before, but his son had arranged for us to meet with Giap's aide-de-camp, a man named by the name of Colonel Byung. And we met with Byung, and he was in charge of killing Waugh and Waugh's Mac V SOG colleagues. And Waugh killed many of his colleagues. And so, to answer your question about what did all this mean, it was incredibly interesting to listen to these two men, former arch enemy who had killed one another, each other's colleagues, brutally, as I describe in that mission. And here they are, meeting without animosity 50 years later, talking about what guerrilla warfare is, what it means, and is it necessary.
Did they have?
I write about that in the last chapter.
Yeah. Did they have respect for each other?
They met without enmity. I mean, we were. There's an amazing photograph of it in the book too, because you can just see the body language. It's like, it was remarkable. It was extraordinary. I took another trip with Waugh to Cuba because, as you may or may not know, the CIA was responsible for the killing of Che Guevara. And technically it was the Bolivian Rangers who pulled the trigger. But standing there was a guy named Felix Rodriguez, in the photograph I have in the book, of the last photograph of Che, minutes before he was executed. And Rodriguez was in charge of that mission, and I interviewed him for the book. And the reason that he was on the CIA's kill list was because he was advocating for nuclear war.
Yeah,
right?
Let me jump in. I read and studied the last days of Che, and how the Bolivian forces finally found him in that, in the jungle, in that small house or whatever it was. But there was no talk at all about a CIA involvement ever. Reading about it in your book, I have to step back and go: is there isn't anything that the CIA at this level isn't involved in, and how they managed to keep it so clandestine?
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable. It really is. And again, reserving moral judgment, reading the facts, and then letting yourself come to the conclusion at the end is quite an experience, I think, because so to that end, I went back to Cuba with Billy Law and some other people who had to remain nameless. It's very mysterious. After I left, I realized, is this a CIA operation that I was like the unwitting patsy in? I think maybe I was. I write about it in the last chapter.
Yes.
But there we are. What we're doing is we're going on Billy Waugh's last halo jump. Okay, so halo is a form of insertion for a lot of CIA operators, and also the military, and it stands for high altitude, low opening. Billy Waugh himself was on the first team that actually ever did a halo jump in combat, and that was in Vietnam. They jumped into Laos. And so, he's a legend because he was on this first team, and Che Guevara's son allegedly wants to halo jump with Billy Waugh, which is why we're back there in Cuba doing this jump. And, it was fascinating. I mean, I don't want to give too much away in the book because it's, very interesting. But afterwards, we went to the cigar club where Ernesto Guevara is Che's son, and we were his guest, and we went to the cigar club where his father, Che Guevara, and Fidel Castro used to sit, smoke cigars, and plot the demise, maybe even the atomic demise of the United States of America. And there's famous photographs of that, and there we are sitting in the same room talking about what it meant to be, what it means to, conduct guerrilla warfare, and Che's death. And is it necessary after all these years? I mean, it was remarkable.
Let's take a break, and which we need to do. But when we come back, can we talk some Tom Clancy? Can we go there?
Yes.
Yeah, let's do.
Yes.
Let's do just that. Our guest tonight, Annie Jacobsen. We're talking about her new book, which is called Surprise, Kill, Vanish. And it's an incredible read, and it is available over on Amazon. The links are at jimmychurchradio.com. Head straight over to Annie's site. It's great. We'll be right back after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Annie Jacobsen. We're talking about her new book, Surprise, Kill, Vanish. You can get it on Amazon. You can click on Annie's links over at jimmychurchradio.com. It'll take you straight there. And Annie, before we move on, these are Jimmy Church stupid questions, but how do these guys get paid? W-2s. Going to a car dealership and you're filling out the credit app, right? You get down to your employer. How does that go down?
Mm-hmm. So there are two different ways. You're either a blue badger or a green badger, and blue badgers are CIA employees, so they get just paid through the CIA. They have CIA health insurance. Okay.
Right.
Green badgers mean you work on contract. Doesn't mean you're a contractor. You're not like Blackwater. you actually, like Billy Waugh, for example, sometime he was a Blue Badger, but he didn't like it because you have to have an apartment in Washington, D.C., you have to behave like an employee. And a lot of these guys prefer to be on their own so they can turn down jobs. They can live in Las Vegas or wherever they want to live, right? And just be called upon and then accept the mission and go. But the guys who are Green Badgers, it's very interesting about the payment because, for example, one person I was discussing this with said it was a real problem when he got audited, just by chance. In other words, like, you could just easily get audited. Like, they pull your number up, they're like, oh, let's look at this guy. And you cannot ever reveal that you work for the CIA. And so you have to provide all this paperwork that is essentially not what it says it is.
That must be the craziest 1099, right?
Can you imagine?
I can't. I can't.
I mean, here's another one. On that note, even more interesting is gunshot wounds, okay? Because, like, a guy I know had a gunshot wound. All these guys get wounded. And his gunshot wound, so when he's over in Afghanistan, he's treated by, CIA doctors and military doctors, because they're almost always on bases that are... They're on a military base, and they just have their own section. It's like, oh, that's the area we don't go, right? 'Cause
right.
That's the agency guy, the ground branch guys. But his gunshot wound got infected, and so he's back in the United States. And
oh, we just lost Annie. Oh, is that crazy?
And then when it happened to him the second time...
Annie, let me jump in. You just dropped out and went silent. That was crazy. Okay. It just picked up right now. We got interrupted. You
got to put your night vision goggles on and watch. What's happening.
We just got officially interrupted, and there was a beep. Beep. You need to go back and listen to this after the show. Okay, you might get a phone call.
We are on a landline.
Yeah, you might get a phone call after the show. We went a bridge too far. Okay.
Well, I wrote this in the book. I mean, it's an interesting detail.
Okay, let's go. You have to repeat it. Okay, so let's go.
Okay.
Oh,
so what part of the gunshot wound did you hear?
It got infected.
Okay, the gunshot wound gets infected, and the guy comes back home. You get treated on a military base, right? Because the CIA's bases are always on a military base. Regular people can't go there. So you're treated by the military doctors. And then when this individual came back to the United States, and it happens to a lot of people, if their wound gets infected, they go to the local doctor here in the United States, and the doctor is required by law to report a gunshot wound.
Of course.
So they have to say, well, how'd you get this gunshot wound? And the guy says, I had a hunting accident.
Right.
Okay, fine, right? That's fine the first time.
How many hunting trips are you going on, sir, that you get shot every single time, and you're here in my office? Yes. And speaking of care, what about psychiatrists? Right? Do these guys hit the couch, and how does a psychiatrist deal with this, or do they see a company psychiatrist?
I have seen medical records on a lot of people because that's something I have to authenticate people, right? And I also authenticate injuries, right? And just as due diligence on my part, I don't report that. But I have seen, and I have seen, PTSD related psychiatric situations. But it's pretty clear to me that the doctor knows. Like, for example, let's just say you're retired Delta, okay? So you're retired from Delta, but you're back in Afghanistan. So perhaps the doctor thinks they're working for Blackwater, right? But it usually says this individual was involved in some of the most extreme combat situations that caused X, Y, and Z. So they because they're retired military, VA is available to them, but it also does get tricky with green badgers because it's not as available, and there is some discussion of that's oblique. But it's reminding me right now of another thing. Going back to Area 51, right? Because it's interesting how this is kind of endemic to the whole world of secrecy. Because there was a nuclear weapons engineer I interviewed for Area 51, and he was on a couple tests that allegedly didn't happen, right? And so when he went to his doctor and was like, I got radiation poisoning, and he was trying to, I saw the medical records that said, this guy may be imagining things, kind of, I'm paraphrasing, right? But it was like, wow, so this is a problem that is historical.
I just got this email in. I'm not going to say who it was from. But he says, Jimmy, great show tonight. I worked with Annie's friend Billy Wall for about 10 years on his website and book project, and I'm not going to continue with that part of it. But he does say, never met a nicer, more down-to-earth man. It was such a pleasure and an honor working with him. I still stay in touch. So I wanted to share that with you. There were some details in here I couldn't read over the air. And now this is the other part that I find so interesting is that Jack Ryan, the new series, is incredible. Listening to you now and the similarities about what is happening in the series Jack Ryan, it's all becoming, very clear to me. But you were a producer on the show too, weren't you?
Yes, I'm a writer-producer. So a lot of times on a lot of the storylines, I was brought in also as what's called a SME, a subject matter expert. Okay, so Jack Ryan is in essence a CIA paramilitary operator. He goes from being a desk guy, an analyst, into the world. And the second season, which will air soon, and I can't say much about it, but he goes full paramilitary, let's just say, right? And I would sometimes have some of my sources Skype into the writer's room and go over operations with us because it was very interesting. Sometimes the writers are like, let's do this, let's do that. And it's like, what's the real authentic thing? And I would say, let's get so-and-so on a call with us. And that, it just made it extraordinary for us as writers, for the writers' room people, like to hear the real walk the talk the talk. And also, I think there's an appreciation on the other side of, for the operators themselves who love Hollywood.
The realism in Jack Ryan, and I'm specifically talking about the series, seems frightening at times. And certainly, what's the star's name that plays Jack Ryan? Help me.
John Krasinski.
Yeah, that's right, John Krasinski. He's going through a lot mentally, and he's questioning a lot of things. But it sounds like it's coming from the real world, and the audience is watching this thinking, it's just fiction, it's entertainment. But it's pretty accurate, isn't it?
Yes, and I give a lot of credit to our creators and showrunners, Carlton Cuse and Graham Rowland. So Graham himself is a former Marine, and Carlton is just a veteran Hollywood, professional who always makes sure that everything is extraordinarily accurate. He was one of the creators of Lost and many shows since. And so Carlton made sure we had other CIA subject matter experts, in the financial end of things, because Jack Ryan comes with a sort of financial analysis background. And Carlton made sure that we had all those bases covered. And I think that's interesting and worthwhile because people are really savvy to these things and they want to feel like they're getting, they're getting a window of truth in what is clearly a fictional world.
Is the CIA involved in their entertainment division? Are they involved in Jack Ryan? Do they have consultants too?
God, no. I mean, I don't even know if the CIA has an entertainment division. I would call that its, influence operation division. But no, they, I know that they were friendly to the production, right? Because we tried to portray it on the axis of what it is, and not, it's not a show. It's not Homeland, It's not like the rogue CIA. I mean, in many regards, Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan is kind of a good old boy. He's a very red, white, and blue American, and he has been since the 80s, and that was very Clancy. Clancy, by the way, Tom Clancy had a real in with Skunk Works, and when that banquet I mentioned earlier, when the F-117 was being retired,
right?
That was discussed, how the only person who didn't have a top secret clearance, who ever kind of got maybe a little whisper of something, was Tom Clancy. And he would get a whisper of something under the guise of it being fiction. But that is if you look at Tom Clancy's books in the 80s, you realize he knew a lot about, espionage and overhead espionage and technology platforms and weapon systems. And that was because he got whispered things, quote unquote, fictionally by guys at Lockheed Skunk Works.
I'm on the official CIA.gov website right here.
Okay.
Entertainment Industry Division right here.
Wow.
It's pretty.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting.
You scooped me.
Yeah. I'm good for this once in a while. But it says right here, as an organization that plays a key role in America's defense, the CIA is a frequent subject of books, motion pictures, documentaries, and other creative ventures. For years, artists from across the entertainment industry, actors, authors, directors, producers, screenwriters, and others have been in touch with the CIA to gain better understanding of our intelligence mission. And it's right here. If you are part of the entertainment industry and are working on a project that deals with the CIA, the agency may be able to help you. We are in a position to give greater authority, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, they've got an entertainment division right there at Langley. So,
fascinating.
Yeah, it is. I've always found that fascinating, and I'm always reticent to click on that link. For the obvious reasons. But when it comes to Tom Clancy, and I realize that he has got his inside sources, but his stuff is so accurate. And when I watch, like the new series Jack Ryan, is it too accurate sometimes? Do you ever get the feeling that Tom is giving the other side ideas? You know what I mean? If you are going to do something crazy, Tom tells you how to do it in the book.
Well, I mean, of course he's died now, so it's his ghost, his follow-along writers. I mean, are you saying, is it too close to accurate?
Yeah, I mean, how to do bad things. Whether it is, some operation against, the Navy or the military or a civilian airline, to commit these terrorist acts. It's spelled out so clearly in the book. It's like giving somebody a roadmap.
Well, I mean, I think that's the CIA's job, is to be ahead of that curve. In other words, what's that famous line right after 9/11 that I believe it was the CIA or maybe it was the FBI, someone said, we concede this was a failure of imagination. So you have to be able to imagine things, and I think that's what people in Hollywood do. I mean, as I write in my book on DARPA, which is called The Pentagon's Brain, after 9/11, DARPA hired Hollywood screenwriters to try and come up with the most preposterous, most evil terrorist attacks they could come up with so that DARPA could build weapons to defend against them. And that was probably a wise move because, like you said, Tom Clancy famously imagined terrorists flying planes into buildings, and then Osama bin Laden led that operation. So whatever you can think of, you should probably know darn well how to defend against.
Your book, Phenomena, am I under the impression that this is heading towards television or the big screen?
It is, hopefully. I mean, all of my books, like a lot of people's books, wind up in what is called development. And there's, these long periods of time of working diligently to try and get something greenlit, where it's actually filmed. I mean, I worked for years with Chris Carter and Gail Ann Hurd, who works on The Walking Dead, to get Area 51 to the screen. And that did not happen. And the rights came back to me on that book. So these things ebb and flow. As for Phenomena, Steven Spielberg's company called Amblin and Blumhouse, Jason Blum's company, and they're famous for doing a lot of horror movies, but also a lot of other great films and TV now. They teamed up, Amblin and Blumhouse, have the license on Phenomena, and I'm working on the show with a veteran TV writer-director named Glenn Morgan of The X-Files, and we're hoping that will make it to the big, to the little screen. But again, these things, you can cross your fingers and jump up and down and work hard and write hard, but these things all have a life of their own, and I sure hope it has a long life.
Well, when they come to you because of your experience and who you've interviewed and the broad, you've covered so much of the military and the Pentagon and the CIA, that surely as a consultant is one thing, but to be a writer is another. And so when they, to write for film and television. So for like Jack Ryan, when they come to you, do they have something on the screen where you're going to consult and say, yes, that's right or wrong? Or do they come to you with an idea for something and you're actually writing from your experience? How does that work?
Mm-hmm. So it's the job of the creators. This is kind of like the short version of it, okay? The job of the creators to decide what that show is going to be and then what the pilot, which is the first episode, is going to be. So on Phenomena, I'm in charge of that with my partner, Glenn Morgan. We decide the show. That's in Jack Ryan, that was Carlton and Graham. So they created the show, created the idea, decided who this new Jack Ryan was going to be, who the enemy was going to be, how it was going to look and feel kind of in big picture. And then the show was greenlit by Amazon Studios and Paramount, who owns the license to Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan. And then the show became a show, and I was brought on along with, I think there were like 5 or 6 other writers, and we all sat in what's called the writer's room, and we map out the whole 8 or 10 episodes of the season. It's this incredible process, like very creative, and especially coming from me writing books where it's like a one-woman show in my office by myself day in and day out, cranking out a 400 or 500-page book by yourself. TV writing is like this wild ride of a group effort, and then you go off and kind of work on your own script, and or with a partner work on a script. But it's much more collaborative and creative than writing books.
I've got a ton of questions that I didn't get to from the audience tonight, but one I do want to ask you before we say goodnight, and this is from Terry in Indianapolis. And he says, please ask Annie, in her book Area 51, on page 381, she mentions the EG&G guys discussed Roswell wreckage at S4. Does she believe it was taken there?
I don't know the exact page number he's talking about, but there's certainly a narrative that I write in the book that I maintain to this day being the narrative I was told. My sources, my main source, that's kind of the big, that has caused so much interest in that book, an engineer from EG&G. He has now died, but he and I remained friendly for several years after the book published, and he stuck with that story. So absolutely, I believe that that story stands as its own narrative. And I don't mean to be vague, but, that's so controversial,
right,
what I wrote in the last few pages of the book, and I spoke a little bit more about it on Joe Rogan, and, it exists exactly as I laid it down.
I have the book here, and I'm trying to think exactly. Was that the part? Was that Nazi wreckage? Or
yes.
Yes, right. I don't want to give away the book either, but I'm just trying to refresh my memory from reading it that possibly was the cover-up, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And again, there are so many different competing narratives about Roswell, about Area 51, how they lit up, how the Nazis are involved, how Stalin is involved, whether it's a black propaganda operation, whether it was a hoax. And, the different narratives have been laid down and have their own origin points and go where they go. And mine is certainly one of those. I make it really clear in that book where I write in the third person, very objectively. Everybody is named and sourced, all of my sources, and then I have one source who was anonymous, and that was because of the sensitivity of the situation. Because, but that's the individual who maintained his story after the book was published, and it's really interesting to think about. And it's I wonder, mindful of history as I am, and mindful that the truth always does get revealed. I really believe that. When, we don't know, but I think it also adds to why so many people are fascinated by Area 51, and that story is nowhere near resolved.
No, and we may never find out. But about 2 months ago, a set of documents that you're probably not aware of, maybe you are, it's called the Admiral Wilson, Eric Davis documents were leaked onto the net, and have since been confirmed to be authentic. These aren't government documents. These are documents and transcriptions of a conversation between Admiral Wilson and Dr. Eric Davis behind the EG&G building at McCarran Airport. But and I'll send you the documents if you haven't seen them. I'll send them to you. Fascinating read. But on the back of the document, I think it's page 15 or page 14. It's a 15-page document. He says, Admiral Wilson says that he was told by somebody else that, and this is the quote, UFOs are real, crashed and landed saucers. Very interesting statement, right? Crashed and landed saucers, but alien abductions are not. Right? And that's the line in this document. And, everybody's wondering what he's referring to. Crashed and landed saucers. Well, that's an interesting statement. And then to follow that up with alien abductions are not is fascinating. And where are these crashed and landed saucers? Are they at Area 51? Are they at Wright Pat? But why such a general statement confirming one side of the question, but totally poo-pooing the other side? Have you seen the documents?
No, I haven't. I don't know. I mean, are you talking? I'm interested. Everyone has their horse in the race, as I like to say, because there is, people become wedded to a certain story, and I get it. I understand that. But I don't know anything. I can't speak to that because I haven't read that document.
I will get it to you. I will email it to you right after the show tonight. It's a very fascinating read, and it gets into all of the aspects of it, too, as well, which is research and backwards engineering. It doesn't mention Lazar or anything like that. These are all official government types and a meeting that they had at the Pentagon in 1997, April of 1997, which is the subject of these 15 pages. It's a fascinating read, and I will get it to you. So what's next for you, Annie, before we say goodnight? What's the next book?
Oh, I always hold that close to the vest, but you can be sure I'm working on something because I love investigating fascinating government secrets that have to do with national security.
Can I tell everybody your text? Annie texted me last week, 2 weeks ago. She goes, "I'm out in the field reporting." And I was just like, yeah. Man, where is she and what is she doing? Well, I can't wait for the next book, Annie. Thank you so much for taking the time, and be safe out there.
Always a pleasure being on your show.
Thank you, Annie. Good night.
Thank you.
I want to thank Annie Jacobsen for coming in. The book is Surprise Kill Vanish, The Secret History of CIA Paramilitary Armies, Operators, and Assassins. Go to AnnieJacobsen.com. You can also go straight to Amazon. Fade to Black's executive producer is Rita Camarion. Show is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee, Dennis, and Bob. Announcers are Steve Harder, Gene Vitoa, Mark D. Kovar, Webmaster Drew the Geek, Music, Doug Aldrich, Intro, Spaceboy. SpaceboyMusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. Syndication is KGRA, The Planet. This broadcast owned and copyrighted 2019 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Until tomorrow night, Dr. Kenneth James, right here. I want everybody to be safe. Go Beckley Teppy.